Brutal clash between Lewis Hamilton and Lando Norris after the China Sprint. Stay until the end and I'll tell you all the details. Subscribe only if you want Hamilton to win his 8th World Championship and be crowned as the greatest driver in history. It started like a whisper in a monsoon. Quiet. Almost forgettable. Just two drivers standing a few feet apart, in the shaded corridor between the McLaren debrief room and the adjacent Ferrari motorhome, where the sun barely reached and the air smelled faintly of warm carbon fiber and overused brake pads. But that moment, that seemingly mundane exchange, was not what it appeared to be. Because in that shadowed space, two Formula One titans from entirely different timelines collided, and neither walked away untouched. While the public believed it was just a friendly catch-up, insiders knew better. Something had shifted. Because when Lewis Hamilton and Lando Norris spoke in Shanghai, they weren't trading pleasantries. They were drawing lines. Measuring egos. Writing the first chapter of a war that hadn't yet begun on track, but had already started in their minds. Hamilton didn't just happen to be there. He had asked his PR assistant to delay his scheduled sit-down with Italian media by 15 minutes. No reason given. No explanation needed. He simply stood by the frosted McLaren glass, waiting. Watching. His Ferrari uniform freshly zipped. No sunglasses this time. He wanted to be seen. Lando emerged from McLaren's race simulation unit 2 minutes later, holding a small protein drink, unopened, forgotten in his hand within seconds. When he saw Hamilton, his expression didn't change. He didn't smirk. He didn't flinch. He walked toward him like he knew this moment was coming, like he had visualized it, like he had prepared for it. Subscribe only if you want Hamilton to win his 8th World Championship and be crowned as the greatest driver in history. And for a few brief seconds, the world slowed down. The first words between them had the rhythm of small talk, but the weight of history. The kind of coded language that veteran drivers use, tone over text, pauses over punctuation. What sounded like mutual admiration was actually layered with subtle tests, psychological footwork, and passive shots fired across the table. And every team principal within earshot knew it. Inside the McLaren motorhome, Andrea Stella stood still, his eyes flicking from the live telemetry screens to the interaction outside. The audio was out of range. But body language was enough. He didn't say a word. He just folded his arms, watching the exchange like a grandmaster studying two knights locked in battle. Over at Ferrari, Frédéric Vasseur had just finished a strategy call with Maranello. But he paused when one of his data engineers slid a tablet in front of him, screen displaying a frozen security feed, Hamilton and Norris, mid-conversation, with timestamps marked and zoom levels adjusted. Even Vasseur raised an eyebrow. This wasn't just idle chatter. This was a shift in energy. And the content of the conversation only proved it. "You've been consistent this year," Hamilton had said, nodding toward Norris's recent string of top 5 finishes. But consistency doesn't win titles on its own. Ask Nico. It was a surgical name drop. Rosberg. The only man to ever take a title off Hamilton during his Mercedes era. A man who had to dismantle himself psychologically to survive one season against him. But Lando didn't bite. He smiled. "Yeah, but unlike Nico, I don't have to beat my teammate first." It was a quiet missile, one aimed not at Oscar Piastri, but at the narrative that Hamilton never had real competition internally, that the path was always paved by team orders, politics, or sheer intimidation. The moment the words left Lando's mouth, Hamilton's smile disappeared, not entirely, but enough. A crack in the armor. And then, without warning, Norris pivoted. "You know, they showed me some of your old race sims," he said casually, sipping the now open drink. "The 2018 ones. Brazil. Silverstone. Spa. You were ridiculous back then. Utterly locked in." Hamilton blinked. "Back then?" "Yeah," Lando said. "That version of you? Untouchable. Shame we didn't overlap sooner." Subscribe only if you want Hamilton to win his 8th World Championship and be crowned as the greatest driver in history. It sounded like praise. But it wasn't. What Norris was saying without saying it was this: "You're not that guy anymore. And I'm not afraid of the version that's left." From that moment, the dynamic shifted. Hamilton straightened his posture. His eyes narrowed just slightly, the same look he wore in Monaco 2019, or Abu Dhabi 2021, just before he went silent on the radio. It was the look of a man who had heard the challenge and was already calculating the rebuttal. "Enjoy the clean air while it lasts," Lewis finally said. "Because once the top 3 teams close up, you're going to find out how dirty this sport really gets." He wasn't talking about track position. He was talking about politics. About media spin. About the brutal inner workings of team dynamics when a driver becomes a threat to someone bigger, more established. And Lando knew it. He nodded once, slowly. "That's why I'm learning from the best," he said. "Even if they're fading." It wasn't just a burn. It was an obituary in disguise. And Hamilton? He said nothing. He turned and walked away, not out of retreat, but out of strategy. Because in F1, silence is often louder than rebuttal. He knew the cameras would hear about this. That this encounter would make the rounds faster than any soft tire lap. And he wanted the narrative to spread, because it would light a fire where he needed it most. Inside Ferrari, inside his own garage, and inside the mind of Lando Norris. Because Hamilton wasn't just fighting for race wins anymore. He was fighting for legacy. The moment he disappeared into the motorhome, the paddock came alive. Within hours, radio frequencies started getting encrypted earlier than usual. Ferrari's strategy meeting moved to a closed-door location not on the schedule. McLaren issued a no-media advisory for Norris for the rest of the day, highly unusual for a sprint weekend. Even Sky F1's production crew shifted their programming. Ted Kravitz skipped a planned segment on tire compound behavior and instead started filming a special report on the emerging tensions between generations. Subscribe only if you want Hamilton to win his 8th World Championship and be crowned as the greatest driver in history. Meanwhile, on the fan side of the fence, rumors swirled. Grainy footage of the 2 drivers' interaction leaked. Reddit exploded with body language experts and lip readers. TikTok was flooded with slowed-down clips dissecting Norris's expression frame by frame. Fans began arguing not about race pace or sector deltas, but about psychological dominance. Who flinched first? Who landed the deeper jab? Was this the beginning of the next great rivalry? But no one had the full picture. Because no one, not even the most connected journalists, knew what both drivers felt walking away from that moment. What they didn't know is that later that night, Hamilton sat alone in the Ferrari sim room, replaying Norris's laps over and over, not to criticize them, but to understand him. His line choices. His braking points. His energy. That's when the world tilted. Not literally, but something cosmic cracked in the air, the kind of rupture you don't hear, but you feel in the marrow of your bones. It started with a post-race debrief. Routine stuff. Both drivers still in their fireproofs, sweat drying under harsh fluorescent lights. Journalists swarmed the hallway outside, their lenses hungry. But inside the garage, in that half-lit, half-private corner behind the telemetry screens, something ignited that wasn't supposed to. Lando was leaning casually against a carbon fiber workbench, still sipping from a bottle of electrolyte water. When he said it, the line that would be replayed, dissected, memed, and feared across every screen on the planet. No venom in his voice. No arrogance. Just that chilling calm, the kind you only ever hear before lightning strikes. Gotta say though, not sure Ferrari will ever give you what Mercedes did. I mean, that ship sailed, right? Hamilton blinked once. A slow, mechanical motion. His mind ran faster than any car he'd ever driven. That sentence, it wasn't just words. It was surgical. Measured. A sniper shot to the ego, aimed with terrifying precision. He didn't respond immediately. No. He processed. He turned his head, deliberately, like a storm tracking its target. His eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with calculation. Like a chess master 4 moves away from checkmate and wondering if the opponent even knew they were playing. What's that supposed to mean? His voice didn't rise. It dropped. Lower. Sharper. Like a scalpel sliding out of its sheath. Lando shrugged, not taking his eyes off Hamilton. Just saying, it's not personal. You were a monster in the W12. But Ferrari. He gave a pointed glance toward a monitor showing the Scarlet car's tire degradation. Even Leclerc can't stop them from combusting under pressure. And just like that, it wasn't a conversation. It was war. Hamilton took a step forward, barely half a stride, but enough to collapse the space between banter and battle. PR handlers, who'd been distracted by a call from Maranello, froze mid-scroll. Engineers, tightening bolts on a rear wing, paused. The entire garage inhaled and forgot to exhale. "You don't know what it takes to build a legacy," Hamilton said, each word laced with ice. "You've never carried a team. Never walked into a season with the weight of 1 billion expectations on your shoulders. You think a couple podiums and TikTok edits make you a threat?" Lando's jaw clenched. His reply came fast, almost too fast. "I never claimed I was you. But I also didn't chase FIA loopholes to win." That was the trigger. Hamilton stepped so close their faces would have collided if they wore visors. His eyes burned, not with rage, but something deeper. Disappointment? Pity? No warning. "Let me tell you something," he whispered. "If I had that McLaren right now, your car, I'd have 2 wins, maybe 3. And a pole. Easy. You're fast, kid. I'll give you that. But you're not ready. You've got pace, but no venom. No scars. And if you ever compare my legacy to your potential again, make sure you've at least won a goddamn Grand Prix." There was no shouting. No finger-pointing. Just that unbearable stillness, like the second before a hurricane flattens the coast. But Lando didn't break. Didn't flinch. "I'm not chasing your legacy," he said slowly, like he wanted the syllables etched into time. "I'm writing my own. And I won't need to switch teams 5 times to do it." That line, that was the blow that landed. Not physically, but metaphysically. A body shot to the legend of Hamilton. The entire paddock held its breath. A Sky Sports mic, still recording by accident, captured the whole thing. And there was more. Because this wasn't just a clash of egos. It was years in the making. Back in 2021, when McLaren was quietly pushing for Mercedes engines, it was Hamilton who allegedly told Toto not to offer them full factory support. That moment buried itself in Lando's mind, a subtle betrayal that soured over time. He never spoke of it publicly, but people close to him said he always remembered. In 2023, during a private Pirelli test in Jerez, Lando outpaced Hamilton in identical tire compounds. That wasn't in the headlines, the data was buried, the session unofficial. But the telemetry existed. Hamilton knew. So did Lando. And now in 2025, with Ferrari floundering mid-table and McLaren on the rise, the roles were bending, cracking under the pressure of the narrative. The old king still held his crown. But the court was growing restless. A mechanic dropped a wrench. The clatter made everyone jump. Still, neither man moved. "Let it go," said a soft voice behind them. It was Andrea Stella, McLaren team principal. He knew what he was seeing, the future trying to kill the past before the past could kill it first. Hamilton took a long breath. The kind that comes after surviving G-forces that bend your ribs. Then, without a word, he turned. Walked out of the garage like a ghost that no longer needed to haunt. Lando watched him go. Didn't smile. Didn't gloat. Just stood there, breathing heavy. He knew what he'd done. He hadn't just held his own. He'd lit the fuse. And somewhere, deep in the paddock, in the back of every strategist's mind, one question echoed louder than the engines. Is this the moment the crown begins to slip? Because the torch isn't passed. It's taken. And tonight, it shook in Hamilton's hands. They were practically nose to nose, and yet neither man blinked. The sound of air compressors, distant tire guns, and radio chatter faded into an eerie, suspended quiet around them. It wasn't physical contact that made the moment dangerous, it was the pressure. Invisible, but unmistakable. A pressure that had nothing to do with tire compounds or race strategy. This was the kind of atmosphere you couldn't recreate. You couldn't script it. Because this wasn't about racing anymore. This was about legacy. About dominance. About fear disguised as confidence. You still have to win something before that pen ink dries, Hamilton said, his voice barely above a whisper, but each syllable carried weight. Deadly. Purposeful. It was the kind of voice that had shut down interviewers, unsettled rivals, and silenced critics for over a decade. The kind of voice that didn't need to shout to be heard across the world. Lando Norris didn't move. Didn't smile. Didn't break eye contact. The recent announcement of his contract extension with McLaren had unleashed a storm of media speculation, whether he could finally step up, whether this was his time to eclipse the generation before him. But right now, face to face with Lewis Hamilton, none of that seemed to matter. In this narrow corridor of the paddock, there was no camera filter, no PR statement, no brand manager whispering reminders about tone and image. This was the unfiltered, uncut world of Formula One beneath the surface. A single breath separated the moment from exploding, and that breath came from Charles Leclerc. He appeared not out of nowhere, but with an uncanny sense of timing, the kind only someone who had learned to survive in the political battlefield of Ferrari could possess. He stepped forward, calm, precise, placing himself between the two like a mediator in a conflict he didn't start but could no longer ignore. "Hey. Enough," he said with a control that was almost chilling. "We're not kids in a karting paddock anymore. This isn't Monaco on a Sunday afternoon with your dad fixing your front wing. This is Formula One. You want to throw punches? Do it with lap times." His eyes darted from one driver to the other, not as a friend, but as an equal who understood both sides. He wasn't trying to defuse the situation with softness. He was setting the line that separated world-class drivers from self-imploding egos. Norris tilted his head just slightly, not retreating but acknowledging the interruption. He exhaled slowly, his voice barely audible, like a secret dared to be spoken aloud. "Tell that to your teammate." A flicker. Just a flicker. Hamilton's nostrils flared, not dramatically, just enough to know the words had hit their target. "Tell that to your respect," Lewis replied. No louder. No angrier. Just ice over fire. And that was the end of it. Norris turned, walking away without another word, each step deliberate, slow, like a man planting flags with his heels. He wasn't done. Not by a long shot. When he was gone, Leclerc turned fully toward Hamilton. His voice dropped. Just above a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through the tension still crackling in the air. "You can't let him do that," he said. "He wants you to react. Not just now. All season. Every little moment. He's building a story. And if you start playing his game, you're in his script. Not yours." Hamilton said nothing. His eyes, still focused on the place where Norris had disappeared, weren't filled with anger. They were filled with something far more dangerous: reflection. "I don't care what he wants," Lewis said. "He's not going to rewrite what I've done." "No," Charles replied. "But he can influence what you do next. You can't let him become the reason for your mistakes." Hamilton didn't answer. But he didn't need to. The silence spoke more than words ever could. Exactly 42 minutes later, Lewis sat alone inside the inner sanctum of the Ferrari motorhome, a room known only to a few. Not the main strategy room, not the engineering hub. A private enclave, shielded by biometric access and a coded door. No branding. No windows. Just steel, screens, and silence. The telemetry scrolled on the central monitor. Sector breakdowns, grip coefficients, wind sensitivity data from the CFD models. The sort of things only 3 people on the planet could interpret correctly. He was one of them. His fingers hovered above the digital interface, occasionally swiping through datasets. But his mind wasn't on the numbers. It was on the message behind them. His lap times weren't just numbers. They were messages to the rest of the grid. Signals. Warnings. The door hissed open. Frederic Vasseur stepped in. No words. No greetings. Just the sound of polished shoes on cold floor. He wasn't holding a tablet. Not even his usual leather folder. He was holding a small black envelope. Hamilton looked up. The tension in the room shifted immediately. This wasn't team-related. This wasn't strategy. This was something different. "Lewis," Vasseur said flatly. "We need to talk. Now." Hamilton turned in his chair. For a split second, the world outside ceased to matter. The buzzing paddock. The flashing cameras. The press waiting to twist every expression into a headline. None of it existed. Vasseur placed the envelope on the table. No logo. Lewis asked. "No sender," Vasseur replied. "No return address. Just your name. And a seal that matches none of the official stamps from the FIA, Liberty, or even Ferrari." Hamilton opened the envelope carefully, like it might contain explosives. Inside was a single page. Not typed. Handwritten. Precise penmanship. Coded references. Locations. Times. And a single phrase at the bottom. You've already been in the car that changes everything. Now you need to decide what to do with it. His pulse slowed, not quickened. Slowed. He recognized the handwriting. Years ago. A ghost from the paddock. Someone who'd vanished after a scandal that never reached the public. Someone who had once hinted at an alternate F1, an unofficial test program outside any team, any nation. Hidden away. Beyond the known schedule. I thought that project was dead, Hamilton said softly. Vasseur remained still. Apparently it's not. What do they want? Lewis asked. Vasseur took a breath. Not speed. Not victory. They want secrecy. And if you're in, you won't be racing just against Norris, or Verstappen, or even time itself. A long pause followed. Then, you'll be racing against history. Outside, engines fired to life once more, unaware of the decision being weighed inside that silent steel room. A decision that could change Formula One forever. There are moments in a Formula One season that define championships, but what happened in Shanghai wasn't about points, strategy, or mechanical advantage. It was a fracture. A cultural and generational earthquake that sent shockwaves through every paddock, garage, and boardroom in the sport. And it didn't end with the race. After the podium, while broadcasters replayed champagne shots and edited highlight reels, the real story unfolded quietly, away from cameras, in hallways and behind locked doors. Mercedes called an immediate internal meeting. Not the usual debrief. This was off script. Senior communications officers were summoned. 2 lawyers dialed in from Brackley. The issue wasn't the overtake. It wasn't even the middle finger. It was the message that had gone global. Within 14 minutes of the checkered flag, the clip of Hamilton's gesture had racked up 9.6 million views on X alone. TikTok edits spun the moment into gladiator-level drama. One clip had Hamilton's radio audio mixed with Hans Zimmer music and clips from his 2008 and 2020 titles, branding him the fallen king who fights like hell. Another called it the day the legend snapped. Sky Sports scrambled to get exclusive reactions. Crofty went live from a hallway outside the podium. Jenson Button was caught off guard mid-interview and simply muttered, "That wasn't Lewis." Or maybe it was, and we just forgot. And inside the paddock? Every single team was taking notes. Red Bull strategist Will Courtney reportedly said over comms, "This is gold for us. Let McLaren and Merc cannibalize each other. We stay clean, we win the war." But McLaren wasn't feeling victorious. Behind the orange hospitality unit, Norris was pulled into a closed-door session with team boss Andrea Stella and McLaren psychological performance coach, Dr. Maeve Harlow, a figure rarely seen in public. According to Paddock insiders, Stella didn't mince words. "You lit the fuse, Lando. You'd better be ready for the explosion." Lando, arms crossed, allegedly responded, "I didn't come here to be everyone's little brother anymore." That was it. That single sentence marked the end of the old Lando Norris, the fun-loving, self-deprecating paddock joker, and the birth of something colder, sharper, less apologetic. Because while Lewis had legacy, Lando had momentum. And that momentum was now laced with venom. Meanwhile, Hamilton's night in Shanghai took a stranger turn. At 22:37 local time, he was seen leaving the paddock, not in a team shuttle, but in a black unmarked SUV. The destination? A private hotel outside the city, far from the usual luxury haunts the drivers use. Word leaked that he'd requested no staff, no entourage. Just a single assistant and his trainer. Why? Because he wasn't done. Sources claim he spent the entire night reviewing onboards, not just from the race, but from every session of the weekend. He wanted to dissect Lando's moves. Study them. Predict them. Understand what made the kid so dangerous, and why he'd gotten under his skin in a way that Verstappen, Rosberg, and Alonso never could. At 3:12 a.m., someone inside the Mercedes engineering group chat posted a single message. He's not sleeping. He's planning. By morning, every F1 journalist worth their paddock pass was hunting for scraps. Some found them. Toto Wolff, when cornered by Dutch media, said only, "What happened in Shanghai wasn't racing. It was something much bigger." And Lewis knows it. He wasn't wrong. Because behind the drama, behind the finger and the fuck-off, something deeper had shifted. Hamilton had always been a man of dualities, Fierce but composed, emotional but calculated, a champion and a brand. But in Shanghai, the mask slipped. And the world didn't see a role model, it saw the man. Angry, provoked, human, and somehow, more dangerous than ever. Sponsors reacted. Some were nervous. 2 called emergency meetings. 1, an eco-luxury watch brand, considered pulling an upcoming campaign. But within 24 hours, the tides turned. Because Gen Z fans? They loved it. They flooded social media with one phrase: "Let Lewis be angry." On Reddit, a post titled, "This is the Hamilton I've been waiting for" hit 32,000 upvotes in 6 hours. Even Piers Morgan chimed in on his nightly show, saying, "This wasn't a tantrum. This was Ollie dropping his gloves. Tiger Woods staring down the 18th. We're watching the greatest try to remind the world who the hell he is." And Lando? He doubled down. On a podcast 2 days later, he laughed when asked about the gesture. "I've got thicker skin than that. If anything, I'm flattered. That moment's gonna be a screensaver for a lot of people." He said it jokingly. But deep down he knew. He'd lit a fire that couldn't be extinguished. And now the entire season had changed. Because this wasn't just personal. This was narrative. This was box office. The kind of rivalry the sport hadn't seen since Senna Prost. But different, because this wasn't just about racing style. It was about era. About culture. About identity. Hamilton represented something sacred. The impossible dream fulfilled. The boy from Stevenage who beat the system. He was the system now, and for many that made him untouchable, until Norris came along, grinning, fearless, and unafraid to challenge the throne. But where does it go from here? Insiders say FIA is quietly drafting a new conduct in broadcast zone's guideline. There's talk of fines, penalties, maybe even a public statement from Hamilton. But others in the paddock are whispering a different theory. That Lewis has already decided, this is the final war. Not against Norris. Not even against Max. But against time. Against irrelevance. Against the creeping suspicion that no matter how many titles you win, the world eventually forgets, unless you make them remember. And he will. Because the next Grand Prix is in Baku. And in Baku, there are walls. Walls that don't forgive. Corners that don't lie. Mistakes that cost everything. And if Lando thought the battle in Shanghai was fire, he hasn't seen what Hamilton looks like when he's chasing revenge. Not for a race, but for a legacy. And Formula One? It's never going back to normal.